Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us. This is Conservation in the Classroom, where you get to hear from one of WWF's very own experts. My name is Kate, and I will be your host today. And to get started, I'd like to first introduce our featured presenter. We are thrilled to have him here today. His name is Dr. Allard BLOM, and he is the Managing Director for the CONGO here at WWF-US. Today, Allard is going to be taking us through a journey through one of his favorite places in Africa, where he was fortunate enough to work and travel to study one of our closest relatives. Of course, we're talking about gorillas. So Allard, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a pleasure.
So before I pass things officially over to Allard, I just want to take a few minutes to quickly remind those of you that are watching on the webpage to use that Google form that you see under the video there to place any questions that you have throughout the presentation. We will have a question and answer portion of the program at the end, so we will try to get to as many of those questions as we can. Next, I'd like to take a minute to introduce our three special guests that we have joining us on camera. So just a reminder, special guests, as soon as I introduce you, make sure to unmute your microphone and say hi to everybody. So first up, from Graysonville, Maryland, if you guys are ready, we have the Koss family. Koss family, are you there? Go ahead, turn your camera on and say hello.
Hi.
Next up, from Athens, Georgia, we have the Comets Vikings, or the Com Kings, as they like to be called, class at the Athens Montessori School. Hi, everybody. Great. And last but certainly not least, joining us from Rhode Island, we have Sienna and Andrea from Wickford Academy. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
We're very happy to have all of you here joining us. Without further ado, Allard, if you're ready, the floor is yours. You can take it from here.
Okay, hi everybody. I hope you can see me. Let me try to share my screen. Give me 1 second to set that up. Okay,
yes,
great.
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to talk today about a place called Zanga-Sangha, and it's a very special place, as Kees already said. For me particularly, I spent 7 years there, and I met my wife there, but also did my research on these lowland gorillas. So let me first explain where it is. The country is called the Central African Republic, and in Sango, which is the national language, the country is called Mbeti Africa, which literally means the heart of Africa, which I think is very appropriate because it's right smack in the middle of the continent. And the area we're going to talk about is Zanga-Sangha Protected Area Complex, which is made up of a national park called Zangandoki and a reserve, a special use reserve called Zanga-Sangha. It's in the corner of the country, in the south corner, on the border with Cameroon and the Republic of Congo, and is part of a World Heritage Site called the Sangha Trinational, with a national park in Cameroon and a national park in Congo. So it's even internationally considered as a very important area. And WWF started working in that area in the mid-80s. My former boss, Richard Carroll, did some surveys there and discovered that it was an area full of wildlife, a very rich area. And we started the project there officially in 1989, and the park and the reserve were created the following year in 1990. It started off really small projects with a vehicle, as you can see. We had a nature club with school kids, as you can see here, who were able to visit the park at that time. And we had only 10 rangers, and the total staff was something like 20-25 people. So it was really small, but from the beginning, the idea was to create a program which would not only protect the wildlife, but also would provide benefits for the local community. And the wildlife was there. Zanga-Sangha quickly became famous for these kind of images. If you've ever been to New York, to the Natural History Museum there, the Hall of Biodiversity is entirely dedicated to this area of Zanga-Sangha. And you will see images of this. This is what they call a bai, which is basically a salt lick, an open clearing in the forest where elephants gather. and get to look for minerals. They dig these holes. You can see some of the elephants leaning down into these holes. They dig themselves, these holes that can be quite deep, several feet deep, and they get the water out, which is has a lot of minerals, salts in it, and which they need to complement their diet. They don't have salt at home, so they have to find it in nature, and that's what they do. And they also maintain these clearings. You can see in the back some of the trees start toppling over. That's because elephants dig under them, and so they maintain this open area. When we started in the 80s and early 90s, you would not be able to take a picture like this because elephants were actually poached a lot. So elephants would not come out during the day. You would not be able to take this picture, but they would come out at night and at the late of the day, such as the picture here. However, these days, it is usually that there are between 50 and 100 elephants in this bay, which is called the capital of elephants, and has featured in many, many documentaries. I know if some of you have ever watched National Geographic or read the magazine, this place is featured many times in it. As I said, I started working in Zanga-Sangha in the 90s. In fact, I started in January 93 and spent 7 years there till the end of 99. I was basically the national park warden, but I also did research on gorillas. One of these is this little guy here. And the place became also famous for its gorillas and not just for its elephants. Again, these guys have featured in many documentaries and photos in magazines, etc. And this is a little guy, but they can become quite big, as you can see here. And look at the beautiful silver on the back of this gorilla and on the thighs. This is a silverback, properly named. And also look at its head. It has a reddish color, and that distinguishes it as a Western lowland gorilla. In contrary to the mountain gorillas that some of you might have seen in documentaries and films, which is much more famous, the Western lowland gorilla is more reddish. It's also slightly smaller, but don't underestimate. This guy probably still weighs 300 pounds. So it's not to be messed with. You know, I'm always glad that they don't participate in the Olympics because they would easily win weightlifting and other activities. And they are impressive animals. They are about the size of a human being, but then, as you can see, very strong muscles. They can climb a tree like just they're like walking up a ladder and just using their arms. They are very impressive. But they're also very cute. When they're young, they're great to see playing. And later on I will show you actually a video of that. And they have strong family ties. The group is led by a silverback and contains usually several females and infants. And as you can see, babies usually right on the back of their mothers. And these pictures are quite amazing. I mean, as you can see, we are actually quite close to the gorillas. And that's not that simple. When I started a process which we called habituation, which is basically making the gorillas aware of your presence and that they accept you as a neutral element in their environment so that you can actually get close to them and observe them. That, however, takes a long time. It's not simple. In the first couple of times we went out into the forest, we would not see gorillas. And it was only due to these people, which are the indigenous Bahaka, who are excellent trackers. They can find, you know, this forest floor. It looks like it's easy, but it's actually very difficult to find gorillas. And to track them is even more difficult. This is Osolo, one of our Bahaka trackers who have been working with us for many, many years. And they are able to find these gorillas. And what we do in the process of habituation is trying to follow these gorillas from nest to nest. Why do I say nest to nest? Well, because gorillas, every evening, they make a nest to sleep in. The silverback usually sleeps on the ground, but the other members usually make nests in a tree. And so you can find them if you go out early in the morning, and that means before 6 o'clock, because in these tropical rainforests, daylight is from 6 in the morning till 6 in the evening. It's pretty constant. You don't have really differences of day and night as we have in some places in the United States, particularly where I live in Maryland. we have, winter and summer, very different hours. Not so in the tropics. And so we track these gorillas from day to day due to these baka. They are indigenous people to the forest. They used to be, as these pictures actually illustrate, hunter-gatherers. The man you can see here is actually carrying a net. They had a traditional life, hunting and gathering from wildlife. Nowadays, that's not so much the case anymore. Most of them now live along the roads and near villages, and they are working in agriculture. But also many of them work for the national park. We now, as I said, we started with about 20 people. We now employ 250 people, of which 30% are indigenous people to the area. And 250 people doesn't sound very much maybe for here in the US, but in the Central African Republic, it's a very, very poor country. It is one of the biggest employers in the country, and in fact the biggest in the province where we work. So it has really helped in providing local opportunities and employment. And as you can see here, there's another baka. He's wearing a mask. And we have been using face masks way before COVID, way before it became something common here in the US. And why? Well, because gorillas actually have carry many of the diseases that we carry as well. As Kate said in the beginning, gorillas are close relatives to us. They share most of the DNA we share, and unfortunately to them, or us, they also share many of the same diseases. Some of the famous ones are Ebola and anthrax, but we're also very concerned that they might attract COVID. For example, some gorillas in zoos already have gotten COVID. And so to avoid that, we keep our distance. In fact, we keep a distance of about 20 feet from gorillas when we are observing them. So all those pictures you saw previously were taken away with the telephoto lens. And we wear face masks when we're close to the gorillas. We also, every time we go into the forest, we wash our boots and we wash our hands with disinfectants. So it really stays clean. So the animals are safe. It's you just have to hold on, and then you look down. You better not be afraid of heights. Let me put it that way. They for about the first 1 year, they hang on to the mom. As you can see, sometimes they hang on to the back, and as you can see here in the lower corner, also onto the legs. But they always stay close to the mom, and little by little, 4 or 5 years, they stay really close to the mom. And it's only.
Thank you so much, Allard.
Sometimes, gorillas get kind of aggressive. And I remember one time being charged by a gorilla, and he stopped right in front of my face and screamed at me. And, they have big teeth. It was very impressive. I mean, there's nothing more exciting for me than that. It's just unbelievable to be able to sit next to an animal that could literally break you in two and have, be quiet and calm, and he's completely relaxed. That's just a great experience.
And probably terrifying at times, I would imagine.
Yeah, not when they're fully habituated. During the habituation process, yes, it's like the best roller coaster you can ever imagine. And sometimes days are absolutely boring, but other days can be terrifying if you get charged. But they can also be fun. I remember one time, silverbacks sometimes they charge. They do a sideways charge. They basically run past you while looking at you. And this gorilla, he came chasing, he came charging out of the forest, and was looking at us, running, and then bang, ran into a tree, and just sat down and looked really embarrassed. And we were just sitting there, going like,
Oh, he probably was embarrassed. He felt silly.
So it was just so funny. I mean, and then he kind of wandered off. So, yes.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, we'll take one more from the chat, and then we'll go to our groups on camera here. We've gotten quite a few questions of people wanting to know how big do they get?
Well, the Western lowland gorilla is slightly smaller than the Eastern lowland gorilla and the mountain gorilla. So there's three basically groups of subspecies of gorillas. They're actually considered two species now. The gorillas that we started, their weight, the males get up to just over 300 pounds. Size, they're about a human being. About the same size if they were standing up, but of course they rarely stand on their hind legs. They usually go on four legs. The females are quite a bit smaller. I would say probably roughly about 160, 170 pounds for the females. And then, of course, babies, they start, just like humans, very small and then grow over time.
Okay, so let's start with Wickford Academy. Sienna, if you're ready, you can go ahead, unmute your microphone. You can go first.
Okay, so my first question is, generally, how long is a silverback able to keep its troop together?
That varies a lot. Usually they, I would say maybe 8 to 10 years is pretty typical. Gorillas in the wild get to maybe 40 years old, 45. And silverback, if he's lucky, he become, like 20 years, 25 years old, he becomes silverback. But they actually, many times they fight over the females, and they have to, win over females to their side, if you want to call it that way. Sometimes that is just by displaying. If he looks big enough, the other silverback will back down. But sometimes they actually get into fights, which is very impressive.
Okay, and my second question.
Oh, hang on. We're gonna rotate and come back to you, okay? So hang on to that thought. Hang on that thought. Let's go over to Com King's class. If you guys are ready, you can go ahead and ask a question. Unmute your microphone for us.
Do gorillas really eat so many bananas?
Actually, normally speaking, they do not eat bananas. Bananas do not grow in the wild in Central Africa. However, they do sometimes get into plantations of people around houses, and they will eat bananas. That's something that we hope they don't do too often, because people don't like the bananas to be eaten by gorillas, and it creates conflicts. But in Zanga-Sangha, it's not really a problem.
What a fun question. Okay, Cost family, if you guys are ready, you're up next. Go ahead, turn your camera on and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, so we were wondering if you're able to, when you're in the wild with them, have you been able to communicate with them? Is there a certain sort of way that they can communicate with humans? Obviously not verbally, but
an action way?
Yeah.
Not really. It's difficult to say, what is communication or not. As I said, the point of habituation is really that the gorillas do not acknowledge you in the environment, but that's theory, not practice. Particularly young gorillas, the infants and the young males, like the 5 years old I was just talking about, the twins. They love to interact with people. They will try to run up to you or grab something from you. So you always have to be very attentive. Is that communication? No. But do they like to play? Absolutely. And so they see you as a plaything. Really, that's the best way to explain it. Do you have really communication going? No. But and we try to avoid physical contact at all costs, because, as I said, because of the disease transmission risk. So when a gorilla approaches, we always back away. But sometimes the little ones, they come up pretty close, and you cannot always avoid that situation. So yeah, they definitely like to play with people.
Okay, we'll hop back over and take one or two from the website, and then we'll go back to our on-camera groups here. So this is an interesting question we got from Isabel in California. She wants to know if gorillas have a different social status similar to human communities.
Well, as I said, they are, the silverback is well, I can't say in charge, because that's probably not the right word, but he definitely defends the family. But he doesn't decide what happens. Let's put it that way. And as I said, the family unit is really a male, but usually several females, and then their offspring, which can, it can be anywhere between 5 gorillas to sometimes 15, 20. Mountain gorillas get up with larger groups and sometimes with multiple silverbacks. That's not what I've seen for Western lowland gorillas. But the females also really are very vocal. I mean, sometimes, in mountain gorillas, it was mostly the silverbacks, but I've seen the females being more difficult to habituate than the silverback. I remember, for example, one female which was really difficult for us to habituate, and the silverback would just walk past us and would completely ignore us. Then the female would show up and would charge us and scream at us, and then the silverback would come charging at us, and we're going like, well, you already know it was us. You've seen us. Why are you making such a fuss about it? But the female was basically telling him to come, and so he did.
Female makes the rules, huh?
Yep.
This is another interesting question we got here from Jay Lee in Michigan. Are gorillas forced to leave the group, or do they just stay and the group grows larger?
I'm not sure if force is the right word. They leave. Females sometimes move to other groups. Males usually, when they become blackbacks, at some point they want to set up their own family. I think in that sense they're like teenagers. I mean, not that different than human society. I mean, teenagers, sometimes will hang out with the family, but in most cases, they go off on their own. So gorillas are not that different. And also, as I said, some females will stay with some silverback until he dies, basically. Others are more fluctual and will leave for another group and sometimes come back too. I mean, so it's a bit more a fluctuating situation.
So they get to decide, though. They're not like kicked out by anybody.
No, I would say sometimes, it might be that a blackback might be pushed out of the group by the silverback, but usually because they're related, it's not much of an issue. So that's why I said it's difficult to say if they're really pushed out. But I would say in most cases, they just decide it's time to move on. Very similar to humans.
Right. Told to get a job, right? Pay
Yeah.
rent, something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Sienna, Wickford Academy. If you're ready, go ahead for your next question.
Okay, so my next question is, what was the scariest thing that has ever happened to you while tracking a gorilla?
While tracking a gorilla, not that much, but I did have a very scary experience with wildlife. I was actually gored by a buffalo, so that's definitely was very scary. And that was actually just on a Sunday afternoon stroll behind my house. I wasn't even doing anything in particular. I was just out walking with my wife, and that was definitely scary. And I've been chased around a tree by elephants. But the most scary animal, humans. No doubt about it. Running into poachers or something like that is definitely more scary than any animal I've ever come across.
Thank you.
So you were never scared by gorillas
No,
in all
I
that
mean,
time?
not really, because my experience with gorillas has always been positive. But it's just the experience you have. I mean, we did have one person bitten once during the habituation process, because when you're doing the habituation, if a gorilla charges, you're supposed to stay absolutely still, not move at all, and just look down and pretend that you're not there. And in this case, the person actually moved and got bitten in the arm. It wasn't that serious, but potentially it could be. So yes, that can be scary, but I always had the impression, maybe falsely, that I knew what I was doing. And so, I was safe. But I have said the same about being a buffalo. I did my master's and I walked among the buffalo and never had a problem. But just, as I said, I did get gored, and now I'm more terrified of buffalo than I was before.
Is that what you did wrong, Allard? You made eye contact with the buffalo? Is that what
No, the buffalo are not like gorillas. They are actually a lot more unpredictable. They're not the smartest animal around, to be honest. When they charge, they don't stop. It doesn't matter what you do, they will come for you. And
Yikes.
they are one of the most dangerous animals, together with crocodiles in Africa. They cause most people injured and death due to wildlife, hippos, buffalo, and crocodiles. And when people see them, they think they look like cows, and they behave like cows, but they're more like the bulls that you might know from Spain. They charge, and they're very fast.
Yikes, definitely not cows.
No.
Okay, let's head over to the Com Kings class for your next question. Go ahead, come on up and unmute your microphone there.
Can gorillas swim?
No, I would not say they swim. Until actually relatively recently, until we started actually studying gorillas, we thought they wouldn't actually go into water. That turns out to be completely wrong. They go into swamps and they will go into water until their necks. But we have never seen them actually swim, but they seem to be quite comfortable in water, crossing it, streams or whatever. But I don't think they can actually swim. But who knows? I might be wrong.
That's a good question. Okay, Cost family, if you're ready, your next question here.
We were wondering, like, when you were going over before saying how the gorillas, they like build nests for nighttime. We were wondering like what materials they use and different things and why they build the nests.
I think they built the nest just to be comfortable, particularly if you're up in a tree. It's nice to be on a stable platform. If you roll over at night, you don't want to fall out of the tree. So have a stable platform to sleep on is definitely good. They also do it on the ground, so I guess it's just comfortable. I mean, they look comfortable. I mean, I've laid down in them; it's quite okay. I mean, they basically wave branches together and kind of make a nest like a bird does, and it's quite comfortable. So I think that's just their way to be happy and sleep well. They sometimes can use tools to fish for termites and ants, but most of the time they just go up in trees, forage for fruit. Western lowland gorillas eat a lot of fruits, and they go from tree to tree. And but they also eat a lot of herbaceous vegetation, grasses and sedges in swamps and things like that. So that's why they actually go into the swamps, particularly for that certain plants that they love to eat.
Okay, let's hop back over to some that were submitted through the webpage here. Aaron and Max in New Jersey want to know, what is the biggest threat to gorillas? Oh,
people, no doubt about it. Poaching, and sometimes trade for animals. Sometimes, they will kill a whole family to get a baby gorilla for the international wildlife trade. Luckily enough, that has become rarer, but the biggest threat is still poaching. Particularly also gorillas get caught in snares, even though people might not hunt specifically gorillas, because most hunters find them dangerous to hunt, because gorillas can defend themselves and do. But they do get caught in snares, and that will sometimes lead to amputation of limbs, but also can lead to the death of the gorilla. And as I said, particularly if the silverback gets killed, the group disintegrates, so it can be a very big social disturbance for them as well. And the second biggest threat, I would say, is diseases, actually, either human-induced diseases or natural diseases like Ebola. You probably have all heard about the Ebola outbreaks in Western Central Africa. Well, in Central Africa, Ebola is extremely deadly to gorillas as well. And we know one park, for example, over 90% of the gorillas were wiped out in a couple of months' time. So that is a very big threat to them as well.
We'll sneak in another question here because it's related to what you were just mentioning. Colin from Stratford Friends School was curious, why do gorillas carry disease? I know you kind of touched on that already, but if you could just explain that.
Yeah, it's the same. I mean, they are very similar to humans, and they carry many of the same diseases, and are, just as dangerous to them as they are to us. They seem to be particularly sensitive to lung diseases, something airborne diseases. So, like a common cold can be very bad for gorillas. Ebola, I mentioned, is even more deadly for gorillas, it seems, than for humans. Of course, they don't have the medical care that humans have. Although there are some indication that they use certain plants to medicate themselves. That has not been proven, but there's at least some indication. So, but yes, they have pretty much the same diseases that humans get, gorillas get as well, and vice versa. So we can also get diseases from gorillas.
Okay, I'm going to combine two questions that got submitted here, and then we'll go back to our groups on camera. So Liv in Pennsylvania was wondering, how long have you been studying wildlife? And then kind of related, Gianna in Oregon was wondering, how did you know you wanted to study gorillas in particular?
Oh, well, I've always, I mean, since I was a young kid, since elementary school, I was always interested in wildlife. And, also according to my parents, I was always out and about, wanted to do bird watching and look for deer and other animals. So I've always had an interest in doing that. And I grew up in the Netherlands, and I went to Wageningen University to do a biology degree. And that I chose that university particularly because they had a strong wildlife biology background. And I must say the first years were quite tough because there was nothing on wildlife biology in the first years. Is all about chemistry and biochemistry and physics and statistics and things like that I was not really particularly interested in. But I got through it with difficulty, and I started studying really since a young age, and then in university I had the opportunity to study deer in the Netherlands, and then in Spain, and also lynx, the cat. So I had a great time there, and by coincidence, while I was working in Spain, I got a text message from my professor at the university, and he was asking if I was interested to go with another friend of mine to Gabon. In Central Africa. And at that time, I didn't yet have a job or anything. I was just still finishing up my master's degree. And I said, sure, why not? It was literally a spur of the moment decision. I was actually planning to go to Latin America, to Venezuela, but I ended up in Gabon, and actually working on elephant surveys and great ape surveys. So we did the whole of Gabon, surveyed the whole country. And that's how I got really interested in elephants and gorillas. And then later, I did my PhD much later because I during my survey work, which was mostly research, I started to realize that elephants were in very serious trouble. Before we started doing the elephant surveys in Central Africa, everybody thought that the forest protected the elephants, that poaching was not a big problem in Central Africa. I mean, everybody was talking about savanna elephants being killed in those days in the 80s. There was a huge uptick in poaching of elephants. But our data clearly showed that was not the case, that elephants were being wiped out in Central Africa on large-scale elephant poaching. And so I decided that I did not want to do just research, but wanted to get more involved. And that's when I actually started working for the Panda, for WWF, in protected area management. I got my first job setting up a new protected area in what was then called Zaire. It's now called the Democratic Republic of Congo, for the okapi. I helped establish the Okapi Wildlife Reserve. And for those who don't know what an okapi is, think about a cross between a zebra and a giraffe. That's what it looks like. It's actually a member of the giraffe family and lives in the forest of Congo. It's the only place on Earth where they exist. They are one of the last large mammals ever discovered, and I helped establish a huge reserve for the okapi. And that's how I got into actually protected area management, and that's how I also ended up in Zanga-Sangha. And while I was there, I realized that the elephants were a good attraction for tourists, but it wasn't really something that special. I mean, there's other places in the world where you can see elephants, but there's no place like Zanga-Sangha where you can see elephants and now the gorillas and other animals. So I decided that to develop further tourism, I wanted to work on the gorillas. So that's very short.
No, I mean, I think that's great. It also speaks to the value in sometimes those spur of the moment decisions, right? Like you just have to take a chance and
Yep.
see where it takes you. Okay, our 3 on-camera groups, this is going to be our last round of questions. So make sure to pick one good one left on your list there, and we'll go back to Wickford Academy first.
Is there anything we could do as consumers who buy products or voters who can write to our Congress people to help gorilla conservation?
Absolutely. One of the things you can do, and that is just to protect the forest, is when you buy wood products, look for the label that says FSC, which stands for Forest Stewardship Council, which means it comes from certified forests that are much better managed. In the area I was working, there were several companies that we convinced to do that. And one of the things they do, for example, is they do not allow people to go and hunt in the concessions that they manage. And they provide alternatives to bushmeat, which people eat locally, so that people don't need proteins from the forest. So that's one of the things that you can simply do. Home Depot or Lowe's or any of those companies, they sell FSC. Let's look for the label. It's a little green label on the wood. So that's one thing you can do. And oh yes, most definitely write to your congressman. We need more funding to go to programs like the Central African Regional Program for the Environment, which is funded through the U.S. government through USAID and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Those are essential programs. There are special programs for wildlife, including for gorillas. So write to your congressman, write to your senator, and saying that you really support these programs and that they need to keep on funding them.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and please do so. Great work.
Okay, next up, our Com Kings class. Your last question for Allard.
How many gorillas are left on Earth?
Oh, that's a difficult question to answer. I actually don't know exactly because we don't actually know specifically. We do know that mountain gorillas are the rarest of the gorillas. There are a couple of thousand now left. The same applies for eastern gorillas. The mountain gorillas are actually doing relatively okay because they are being well protected and have been increasing in the numbers. The worst off are the eastern lowland gorillas that are going down significantly in numbers. There used to be tens of thousands. I don't know how many are left now because it's actually in an area that is very unsafe to go at the moment. There are militias roaming around. So we don't have recent data. The most common one is the western lowland gorillas, but their numbers are going down rapidly as well. So how many are there? I cannot tell you, but I can tell you that most of them are doing badly.
Okay, and last but not least, the Cost family. Your last question.
Has the gorilla population come up yet?
You mean the numbers?
Yeah.
Yes, as I said, mountain gorillas are doing okay. They have actually increased in numbers over the last decade or so. They're doing okay. They are in Uganda and on the border between Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Uganda. So overall, they are doing well, and that's because of protected area management. The folks are doing a great job there of protecting the gorillas. For example, Rwanda has a booming industry, tourism industry based on the gorillas. People go out and visit them. Uganda is doing that as well, to a lesser extent Congo. But in Rwanda, it's one of the major foreign currency earners is the mountain gorillas. They are very popular for people to go and visit. So it's a great project. And if you ever have a chance, absolutely do it. It will be one of the most exciting things that you ever do in your life, believe me. But it's expensive to go there, so it's not necessarily something that you can easily do. But just keep in mind, if you grow up and you have the resources to do so, I would definitely advise you to do so. It's a great experience.
So before we wrap up here, Allard, do you have any last pieces of advice for all those kids out there that are wondering what they can do to help?
Yes, as we said already, there's several things you can do. Buy FSC certified wood, write to your congressman to support conservation, but do it also yourself. I mean, WWF has programs. I mean, you are in a WWF program at the moment. Support the organization, support other organizations. There are plenty of organizations that support gorilla conservation, Wildlife Conservation Society, for example, out of New York. I used to work for them. They run the New York Zoo, for example. They also have a great program. So be active and talk about it. Talk about it in your classroom, talk about it in your school, talk about it with your friends. You know, how important wildlife is. And don't forget the wildlife in your backyard. I mean, you can see this picture behind me. This is actually taken right outside of my window. You know, I have foxes in my backyard, and I actively, for example, help clean up the forest just outside my house. I did that yesterday, just to grab a plastic bag, you know, and collect trash. I mean, it's amazing to me how much people just throw out of their car windows, you know, and litter everywhere. Just don't do that. You know, plastic should be in the trash bag, not in the environment. You know, animals choke on it. You know, so just don't throw things in the forest. You know, the forest is not a dump, and that's some things you can do. And say somebody, you know, you see somebody throwing out the trash, tell them. You know, say, hey, you shouldn't be doing that.
That's good advice. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up. We are at time. So I just want to give a huge thank you to all of you that watched, and a huge thanks to the three of you that joined us on camera, our special guests. Of course, a huge thanks to Allard as well for spending some time with us today. I think we all learned a lot about gorillas and Zanga-Sangha, and we appreciate your time. Before we sign off officially, I just want to share my screen one last time to let everyone know about a few other resources that we have available that kind of tie in with Allard's presentation here. You can find all of these on the Conservation in the Classroom webpage. So we do have a Kahoot quiz that you can play containing questions from Allard's presentation. You will have to just go to kahoot.it and enter that unique game pin that you see on your screen there. Like I said, this information is on the webpage as well, so you can head over there and find it. We also have some great gorilla articles on the WWF website that you can access. And if by chance you have additional questions for Allard that we didn't have time to get to today, you can always email them to wildclassroom@wwf-us.org. And be sure to mark your calendars for our next event, which is on Earth Day, April 22nd at 3:30 Eastern Time. We'll be joined by Eve Downing, who is an Arctic Youth Ambassador. She's going to be telling us all about life growing up in Alaska and what she's doing to help advocate for the environment. So we appreciate everybody being here. Thanks for joining us. Our three special guests, if you want to unmute your microphone and say goodbye to Allard, we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Thanks for watching.